Welcome back to another episode of the Big DK Energy Podcast. My name is Danny K, or the DK and the Big DK Energy, and I am gracing one of my hometowns of Boca Raton with my presence this weekend. And so while doing so, I decided to catch up with some friends that are doing some big things in their lives while also contributing to the rest of society. And one of the guys to help me with that is today's guest. Having come down from New Jersey in 2015, he was an undergrad at Monmouth University, and after doing his graduate at Barry University, he is now a fully licensed psychologist. And so today we're going to talk about mental health, especially for guys. Essentially, we're putting the men in mental health.
Love that.
And
I really love that.
Of course. And we'll just go from there and find out more about him. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest, Mr. Ryan Meir.
Thank you, Danny. I had told you before we started, this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast, and maybe after this, maybe the last, depending on how my voice sounds on this thing. But it's truly a pleasure to be here, so thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I know that you and Alexa are very busy in your lives, but that even though that you help other people out with their, you know, what's going on in their lives, you guys need your own time as well. And I'm glad that you took some of your free time to be on this show. So Ryan here is actually the boyfriend of a former guest, Alexa Cohen, who also works in like the psychology department in that area of work. And, you know, she's in the back there, so we're going to wave and say hi.
Looking wonderful as always.
Always. She wasn't allowed to be on today's show because she would have made us look bad.
Without a doubt. That takes the shine off both of us, Danny, very quickly.
Very, very quickly. So you're a Jersey boy, right?
It's pretty good. Yes. I don't think it shows up as much when I talk. I think the word that gets me every time is water. Once I say water, people like 3 streets down know that I'm from New Jersey.
What drink do you use to wake yourself up?
Coffee.
Okay.
What do you think about that one? Not too bad.
It's not as bad as I thought. No, my grandparents, they're from Brooklyn, so their accents are very thick. Would you like a coffee?
Yes. Every ER becomes an A, and every A becomes an ER. It's like reciprocal in nature. It's awesome.
You know, depending on who you ask. Okay, so like I know that a lot of people tend to blur the line between New Jersey and New York. How do you feel about that?
So I have mixed feelings because born and bred in New Jersey, but my parents are both from Queens, New York.
Okay.
Right? So I'm built in like the New York accent, the New York pride, but grew up in like the suburbs of New Jersey where we actually have like a term, right? So for the people that come down from New York to the beaches in the summer, we call them bennies.
Bennies?
Yeah, it's not something people want to be called.
You know, so it's not an endearing
term. No. And it's like the bennies go home type of thing, but I also understand that like my parents were bennies. So I'm kind of caught in between. So as far as people melting the two, I can live with it because my parents are built in that. But if you asked maybe some of the friends that lived on my street or went to my high school, they probably would not agree with the same sentiment. They'd rather have their own thing.
Okay, you know what? That's all right because you kind of get the best of both worlds in that regard.
Yeah, I do.
And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, being half Korean and Jewish, I get the best of both worlds, and also a lot of crap from both worlds as well. Yeah, in fact,
you got to take the heat too.
Absolutely, and it drives me insane. And speaking of driving people insane, when people are insane, that means their mental health is in decline, and you help people with that.
Sure. Tremendous segue.
Thank you. I'm trying my best out here.
Well, listen, I mean, there's not a major distinction from just your regular people walking around New Jersey and New York and the occasional mental illness. So I would say that was a pretty good segue.
So what made you want to get into psychology specifically? And did I use the correct term? Because, you know, there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists.
That's a great question, Danny. That's a great question. And like I was kind of going back and forth of whether to like go into that or not. But I am a mental health counselor.
Okay.
Right? You could technically say that's a psychologist. I don't really like to use that term because usually when it's a psychologist, it's somebody with a doctorate, right? And usually when they're referring to that, it's somebody that does more of like the research end of it. So it doesn't mean they can't be clinical. It doesn't mean they can't sit and talk with a client and do the whole thing, right?
But psychologists would be more people to like write stuff in the DSM kind of stuff?
Yes, that's precisely it.
Okay,
right? So they're more on like the research end of it. They're more the ones that, you know, when you get those emails and they're like, hey, we'll give you $20 if you want to come do an experiment with us.
Okay, got it.
That's more them. That's more the distinction.
Well, I guess rats are running pretty low if they're asking human subjects now.
Yes.
Wait, we gotta pay them?
I think they're done with the rat mazes. They did all that in the 70s and 80s. I think they got bored.
Yeah, animals can't show pain. This is getting boring. Let's get people.
Yeah, it's time. Let's start doing Milgram experiments and start fake shocking people and see what happens.
Or that one Zimbardo.
Yeah, Stanford prison experiment. Pretty good, Danny. That's very, very good.
I took AP psychology, so, you know, I have a bare skeleton of some kind of knowledge in this.
Some meat on its bones, man. That's pretty good. To know the doctor's name, the psychologist's name is pretty good.
Well, for our AP psychology videos, we would always see Hi, I'm Willem Zabardo, and I'm here to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
You know, like something that was filmed in like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You could totally tell by the crappy production quality.
Yeah, you just brought me back to a very interesting place with that voice of like listening to those videos in undergrad.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago.
And it's so weird to think that a guy who sounds like that came up with one of the most infamous experiments in psychology history.
Yes. You'll notice if you go back in like the history of psychology and the research and everything, a lot of them were very unique in their own ways.
I mean, you obviously know about the Freud story.
I know about a lot of Freud stories. So something interesting about Freud, right? Because everybody knows about the whole Oedipus complex and the mom stuff, right?
And the laying down on the couch. Tell me, how does that make you feel?
With the pipe and everything, the whole thing, yeah.
The whole get-up.
You know what a lot of people don't know, right? Because a lot of his stuff kind of got debunked as time went on. What people don't know is actually when he started doing the therapy thing, he actually used to do it in a way that was reciprocal. So he would actually come in, right? He would be the client's therapist, and then next week they would switch roles. So they would be his therapist. And then they would do this back and forth. Now, over time, and with the research we've done and everything, like that's super, super problematic. Like the roles were not supposed to melt together like that. But that is something that he did for a long time.
Any reason why he did that?
He was the godfather of it. He just kind of did whatever he wanted. Psychology was his life at that point. He ruled that world at that moment. He had nobody really check him, so that's what he did.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the first at something, no one can tell you what to do, right?
Yes. It was his world, so we were all just living in it, or they were all just living in it.
Well, he created some kind of dystopia. If he created the world.
Yeah, that could have been. There would have been a lot of mom jokes floating around, I'd imagine.
Maybe some incest in there, some underlying incest.
There's some layers to it, for sure.
Oh, and speaking of layers, it was Maslow that came up with the hierarchy of needs, right? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know, I was thinking layers, and then I just thought of that pyramid.
Yeah, it's a pyramid.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
So I guess since we're talking about Freud and we're talking about Maslow, during your studies, who are some of the psychologists that really stuck out to you?
What a question, Danny. I haven't thought about this probably since I was in school. So Carl Jung is a guy that is one of the godfathers as well, right?
I've heard him.
And one of his big like contributions to everything was the idea of like archetypes, right? So it's the stuff that you see like now, comic books and stories and stuff like that, where people fit certain archetypes, they have certain motivations.
Like the hero, the villain, the anti, the comedic relief, that kind of
stuff. Exactly, right? And so he started to look at psychology through that lens. Now, again, more psychologists, right? So more in theory, more in informational rather than the back and forth as like a clinical therapist would do. But I've always thought those contributions were very, very interesting because I think, like, interestingly enough, I think it shows up a lot now what he was doing in like pop culture stuff. You know what I mean? Like, we don't really use that so much anymore. You know, listen, there are still some therapists that actually practice, I guess, Jungian, you would say?
Yeah, Jungian.
Does that sound right? But that's more of like a lost art now. It's an older kind of way of going about things. But I think his theories, at least like from my perspective, they're the ones that have stuck the most in the world. And he's always been the most interesting. And then as far as like therapists go, right, and as far as like the clinical part of it, there's a guy named Carl Rogers who created what's called like human-centered therapy.
Mr. Rogers?
He was also Mr. Rogers, yeah. Not the Mr. Rogers.
Oh, okay, got it.
He is a Mr. Rogers.
Okay.
Yeah.
He wasn't very inviting. He's like, welcome to my office, neighbor.
Right. He might have been the original Mr. Rogers because he was a pretty nice guy too.
Okay, well, we're glad because based on what I've heard about like Freud, apparently like some of these guys, sure, it's like, wow, they made such contributions to this field. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they weren't without fault.
Yes, and that's the kind of where in my field it gets dicey, right? Because sometimes it's within the confines, right, of like what they contributed to the field and then the confines of like some of the damage that they did too that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Right? That's why I like Rogers so much because he was the first therapist to really talk about the relationship between the client and the therapist rather than just the clinical work. Oh. So that's why he called it, I said human-centered before, it's person-centered therapy. Okay. But it's humanistic. So his whole thing was unconditional positive regard, right, and meeting the client where they are, always. So even if you think they're in a hard spot or a difficult place, instead of just getting right into solutions, you make it more about the relationship and listening. And I try to use that as much as I can now. And he's been my biggest, I would say, like motivation.
It sounds like a great way to go about it because one thing that I learned post-grad, not that I did any kind of studying besides my bachelor's, is this art of active listening. Are you familiar with it?
Yes. It's the crux of everything that we do. And it's so and imagine in your job doing this, that's crucial. Right? Yeah. Because we have a tendency as humans, when somebody says something to us, what we start to do is we start to think about what we need to say back. But when you do that, you kind of lose your ability to actively listen. You're hearing them, right? Correct. It's coming in. But as far as actively listening and taking in the information, you miss a lot of it. Like, have you ever done the thing where you introduce yourself to somebody, you say your name, they say theirs, and then you immediately forget their name?
all the time.
I do. Outside of like in my therapist world, if I'm not really paying attention, I do this daily.
Yeah.
Right. The reason why that happens is because you hear the name, but because you're engaging in conversation, it's somebody new. You're already thinking about what you want to say back.
Okay, that explains so much because. Yeah. Not to brag or anything, but during school, I would go up and go, "Hi, my name is Danny," and they'd go, "Danny, we've met like 5 times."
Dude, I promise you, we've done this before. Yeah.
It's not exactly the greatest thing, but you know what? It's all right because I am still sane and I have my mental health intact, or to the best of my abilities.
Yeah, and that's like you bring up a very good point too. Of so many people look at mental health of like they want to just be normal, but what they don't realize
normal
doesn't exist, and that's the question, right? There is no such thing as like, all right. They have a struggle with mental health, now they're normal and everything's fine, right? It's not that A to B and that like binary. And I think that's where people get super problematic because that's where I try to work my clients out of this idea of like, I'm here and now I just want to be normal.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that kind of identity struggle growing up, especially since I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So all my life I knew I wasn't going to be quote unquote normal, but then it seemed like back then, of course now it's much more appreciated, but back then I felt like autism equaled, pardon my French here, but retard.
And I'd imagine growing up, right, and trying to wrap your head around that part, right, you start to attach that stuff to identity.
Yeah.
Right, which...
It destroyed my self-esteem for like 16 years.
I'd imagine, and that's such a difficult thing because there's so many different things that dynamically make you you. Right now, I've only met you a few times, right, but if I was asked to describe you, there would be so many more positive dynamic ways to describe you, right, but once we start to kind of identify this stuff and we attach it to ourselves as a label, it gets super problematic, and sometimes people don't really allow you to show your full self because of those like kind of boxes they put people in.
It sucks, to be quite honest with you.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but you know what? We still keep on trucking and try to live each day as we can. So going back to the whole mental health thing, what exactly is your definition of mental health? If you could describe it to a child who just asked you, what is mental health? What would you say?
So if I was going to describe it to a child, I would probably look at it through the lens of like if you're experiencing any emotions or thoughts that are keeping you from being the person that you want to be, the kid that you want to be, maybe we work through this a little bit, right?
Like how so?
So this is more the clinical part of it, right? But like for as far as diagnoses go and things like that, all of us to some degree experience depression sometimes. We experience anxiety sometimes. It doesn't mean you're diagnosably depressed or diagnosably anxious. You're just experiencing the symptoms. So to diagnose something, it has to be through the lens of it's taking away from your daily functioning. Right? So if you're anxious occasionally, but it's not really creating a deficit in your life, yeah, you struggle with some anxiety, but you're not diagnosable.
Got it. Like the anxiety is preventing you from leaving your house because you don't want to crash your car, or at least have the prospect of crashing your car.
Yes, but if you feel some anxiety about going to work because you got a big meeting, it's pretty human. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially like if your boss calls you into the office and you don't know what it is for, it's just like, I don't know, maybe I just get anxious over it, but that's just because I don't know what to expect, because it could be, oh, you're getting a raise, or hey, fuck you, we're firing you.
Yep, and that's a big part of what anxiety is, right? It's like the things that we can't control. We start to make assumptions about that. We even do what we call catastrophizing, which is the word.
That's one of my parents' main vocabulary for me, because I sometimes make up these weird scenarios in my head based on stuff that I think might happen, and it completely like prevents me from doing some stuff. And like for example, like I just got a full-time job, but applying for jobs, some requirements, it's just like, oh, we just need you to have like a college degree and the bare minimum. But I thought just like an associate position somewhere, but it's like I don't have any experience in this one field, so therefore I can't go into this field whatsoever.
Yep. Do you feel like you get like some imposter syndrome with that stuff?
All the time, especially even with this too, because with people like Joe Rogan, with people like Jordan Peterson, people with all the big name podcasts, it's just that, who am I, this kid from South Florida? Who is he to say his opinion on the radio and put it on the air?
And the thing with that, right, and this is interesting, right, because when we go to school to be therapists, right, they talk to you about this a lot, because there's moments in my life where I'm like, how could I be this way or say this or act this way, and then go talk to people about their lives and like trying to make them healthy, right? So we as a profession a lot of times struggle with the imposter syndrome thing of like, these people are paying me to come talk to me to better their lives, and here I am, I haven't done laundry in a week or something like that, right? And it's this idea, like, we forget that we bring ourselves everywhere we go, right? So it's the uniqueness of us that's the important part. So the same thing in your work. There is one thing for sure, Danny, that I know Joe Rogan can't do, and that is show up as you.
You know what?
Right? You bring you where you go.
I appreciate that. Makes me feel a lot better not having millions of followers. I'm just kidding.
Really helps those numbers
Yes.
settle in better.
Exactly. So I really like that outlook on it because mental health, I feel like it's just starting to get at the forefront of people's brains of maybe we should check this out.
Yeah.
But one thing that I realize is that, or at least something that I've noticed, maybe I've just been very fortunate because I've had a lot of good, therapists in my life, that guys, when it comes to men specifically, it seems like it's kind of swept under the rug. And why do you think that is?
So over my time in my career, right, it's interesting because at the beginning, the easy answer is just like, well, men are always told, don't show your feelings, be tough, right? And then I start to realize as time goes on, because I've been a therapist for about 5 years now, right? And it's obviously that's a major piece of it. But it's also about like the emotions that people will accept from guys, if that makes sense. So let me tell you, I know I explained that weird, but...
No, you didn't. Maybe I just need a further example just to like wrap my head around.
I'm going to throw some bonus details in here. So I for about 7 months, about a year and a half ago now, I worked in a jail, right, as a mental health therapist for men in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And it was like life-changing stuff. But it was so interesting because I would talk to them. They're here to see a therapist. They're in an environment where emotions can't really be shown. It gets problematic in there. And they would talk to me and they're like, I don't really feel emotions. I'm not an emotional guy. And I'd be like, okay, then what brought you here? And he'd be like, oh, it's because I'm really angry.
Angry is an emotion, I would say.
And I was like, dude, that's an emotion, right? In that moment, it struck me like how interesting it is. It's like, no, you can't cry. You can't talk about love, or you can't talk about more of these in-depth emotions. But if you're a man and you say you're angry, everybody will just nod their head and accept it.
Correct. Or anything that's like a negative emotion.
Yeah.
It's like if a guy's happy, it's like, oh, why is he so happy? Or, it's just like how, I don't know why some guys are like this, but they're like, what the fuck are you so smiley about?
Yeah. Well, you can yell and scream and throw across the room, right? And they say, oh, that guy's tough.
Yeah.
That guy controls a room, right?
Yeah.
When in reality, it's just all those other emotions that nobody wants to talk about, right? Which is like embarrassment and shame and sadness. It just gets funneled, right? Because when we don't deal with these things, especially for men, it will show up somewhere else, right? We got this idea that we can stuff it away, not let it show up, and then it just goes all into a funnel, right? And at the end of that funnel is anger, and that's how it gets expressed.
Okay, yeah, because the way that you're kind of making it sounds like, I imagine it being fired.
It's like a shotgun spray.
There we go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's go with that.
Yes.
So, like, every pellet, it's like all these emotions, and then to pull in the trigger, oh, you look horrible today. What do you mean I look horrible today?
Yep, and then it turns into this, well, he's just an angry dude, right? And no, that's actually not true. He's a sad person. He's a person that's ashamed. He's a person that's embarrassed. He's got insecurities about himself, right? But he doesn't know how to express any of those.
Misunderstood.
He's very misunderstood, right? But misunderstood also to the sense of like, he doesn't allow, I'm saying he, just kind of speaking in generalities. Obviously, everybody's an individual, right? But when the male mental health stuff comes in, a lot of times it's like throughout their lives, they haven't allowed themselves to express some of those other things. So the only way it's going to come out is through anger, right? And that's accepted by people.
Yeah, I mean, even though that people don't normally vibe with angry people, I mean, anger is a valid emotion. I mean, I wouldn't say funny, but there's a lot of guys out there who still perpetuate that stereotype of, you must not cry. But then it's like, that's a very old world mentality.
Yes, it is.
At least in my opinion, it is.
Yes, it is. And you know what I talk to my clients about a lot, especially when I was in the jail talking to these inmates, right? It's like 15, 20 grown men. A lot of them had, because they're in recovery, right, from just drugs and alcohol, they've done like AA meetings and NA meetings and stuff like that. And I ask them the question, which is more courageous to you? The guy that gets up and speaks, shows no emotion, and then sits down? Or the guy that gets up and speaks, tells you really what's going on in his life, cries, and really lays it out there for you? And everybody always says the second guy, right? The crying and the vulnerability is actually the more difficult thing. That's the more, if you want to use like the word tough, that's the tougher route. The pretend nothing bothers me thing, that's an old school thing, man. And that always kind of light bulbs it for them. Because they're like, oh shit. Like when I see somebody else do it, I think it's courageous and awesome. But then if I do it, I'm being weak.
And actually, it kind of goes back to the imposter syndrome, but it also reminds me of a therapy session that I had. And I don't think this is a breach of confidentiality since I'm the patient here.
You can't breach your own HIPAA laws.
Yeah, exactly. And so they kind of described it as, for example, I was unemployed for a little bit, especially after I got laid off from my job due to COVID. And so I had that old mentality that you having a job means you have worth in society. And by you not having a job, that means you don't.
Yep.
And so, therefore, I told that to my therapist, and she was like, well, what about your sister? And I go, what if she was unemployed? I go, I'd still love her. And it's like, why? It's because she's my sister. And it's like, why can't you do that for you? And that kind of just caught me off guard because I'm like, I don't know.
Checkmate.
Yeah.
Yep. Because again, we don't want to give ourselves that grace, and we do the labeling thing, especially with jobs. Well, if you look at yourself strictly through your profession, you give all your emotional equity to that, so that if your job's going well, you're feeling okay. Job's not going well, you don't feel okay, right? You lose your job, God forbid, now everything's gone, right? I can't just be Ryan the therapist. I have to be Ryan that works as a therapist, right? I am not a therapist. I work as one, right? Because there's so many other things that dynamically make me me. And if I just kind of put it all in that ball, I'm like, I'm Ryan the therapist. Everything I do is going to be through that lens. And that can be super problematic for a lot of us in all professions.
Because I feel like about everyone would want to come to you, to their problems. It's like, oh, Ryan, it's Thanksgiving. I'm so glad we're here. Hey, I need to talk to you about something.
Yeah, I'm like, dude, I just want mashed potatoes. Like, it's pretty like straightforward stuff here.
I'm on my third plate. If you get in between me and my fourth, we're going to have a problem.
And it's the same thing for other professions. We can be proud about our profession. We can talk about it with passion. I think that's beautiful, right? But once we start doing the label thing of I am, and you start to see yourself only through that lens, it has so much now emotional power over your life, right? And there's so many different things that make you you. And if we just kind of pinhole it to one thing, it gets us really caught up.
Yeah, and then so jerks who still have that mentality, and that I don't know if it's because they feel weak about themselves, but they'll be like, oh, you work at a Subway, you're lame. It's like, I'm hungry as hell, and there's nothing open past 9. Of course, I'm going to say thank you to the Subway man because he's saving my life right now.
Yes, and that's just a part of that person's life.
Exactly. I mean, who knows? Maybe they could be DJing on the side. It could be coming up with like a future #1 hit.
Yes, or maybe they love it, and that works too. You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
It's just it's the he does this, so that's who he is mentality, right? And we do this thing where we just like overgeneralize for people, and it's just
Is it kind of catastrophizing in its own way?
yeah. And it's more in like so something I do we talk about a lot is like cognitive distortions, which is like thinking errors, the ways that we think that are not helpful to us. Catastrophizing being one of them. Another one is all or nothing thinking, or black or white thinking. So it's either good job, this guy's awesome. Bad job, this guy's terrible.
Actually,
right? There's nowhere in between. And it puts you in a tough spot, and like there's some things where thinking all or nothing or black and white can be helpful, but there's so many areas in life where there's so many different possibilities and different ways to look at things. And when we kind of confine ourselves, you miss so much about the world. And I think that, especially with the labeling thing, that keeps us like on that very, very outer edges of how you can understand things. And it gets people really, really caught up. These type of people are usually really hard on themselves too.
Got it.
Because it's very rigid.
Actually, now that I think about it, and you said, some people have problems with themselves for the all or nothing thinking. Do you think stereotypes for like other groups of people is an example of that?
Yes. Because again, it makes it so easy to just make a judgment on somebody and then keep moving, right? We don't want to like give a nuanced approach on a human being, a living, breathing human being. So we can just say, well, they're in this minority, so they're this way, and then keep moving. And you lose the ability to see people as human that way.
I mean, some stereotypes do exist for a reason, but then there are also some stereotypes that are just pure, I guess evil is a very strong word to say, but it's very detrimental to the lives of those people. And especially like ones of like marginalized communities who have to go through extra shit on top of their own mental health crises.
Crises sounds pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
Crises.
There we go. And so, your practice, do you kind of help people with all or nothing thinking, or all these kind of, what is it called again?
Cognitive distortions.
There we go.
Which I know, it's honestly just a very nerdy way to say thinking errors. So the type of therapy that I practice from, right, because there's a lot of different type of theory and different types of like modems to practice therapy.
Like CBT.
That's
or,
ACT is one of them. Acceptance and commitment therapy. CBT is the one that I utilize.
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Very good, Danny. Yeah. That big part of that, right? Cognitive thoughts. We go after like thinking errors, like ways we try to stay away from like right or wrong, because that's more subjective. Like what's right, what's wrong. Well, I'm not God. I can't tell you what's right or wrong, but I can tell you what thoughts are healthy for you right now and the ones that aren't.
Right.
Because you have evidence of which ones are not helping you. So we can identify those, the cognitive distortions, and we do what's called reframing, which is like we're going to look at that thought, we're going to take it, and we're going to shift it in a way that's a lot healthier for you. We don't got to make it disappear. We're not Houdini, Yeah. We have to just have a different relationship with that thought. And that's how we help ourselves, right? So with you in the all or nothing thinking, we're not going to make that disappear for you, but you can have a different relationship with it now when you see it and you're like, hey, I see it this way, but maybe it can be a different way. And just to give yourself that little wiggle room so that you're not stuck in the confines of the all or nothing anymore.
It also helps me think that just because I messed up doesn't mean I'm a fuck up in general.
Perfect. That's the shoulds. right? It should be this way. Think about how many different ways every minute of your life could actually go. But we do but it should be that way.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yeah.
It still happened.
Yeah, and you put yourself in an impossible place. Like I can't tell you exactly how one moment should go, but we put this pressure on ourselves. We do in the past too. I did the comment,
Especially in the past.
Yeah, the thing I use with my clients, and it help people remember it. You'll remember it now because it's a really bad joke. But don't should your pants.
Don't should your
That's
pants.
how you remember, right?
Okay.
Whenever you use the word should, you put yourself in this really, really rigid box of there's one way one thing should have went or should go, and now if it doesn't go that way, I failed. Which is an impossible way to live.
Well, I like that a lot better because I do kick myself for mistakes I've made in the past. But then it's not that it prevents me from doing stuff, but like these thoughts will ruminate and race through my mind, and then I'm thinking, am I being fake to myself right now without me knowing it?
Yeah.
Because I don't know what your take is on the subconscious, not the unconscious. Unconscious means you're knocked out.
Sure.
Subconscious.
Yeah.
So what's your take on the subconscious? Because it seems like, of course, we don't know obviously how it operates, but at the same time, do you think it is a major factor in the decisions that we make without us knowing it?
Yes, it is definitely a contributor. What I'll tell you is like the way I look at it is like it's going to be an interesting way to look at it, so hang in there with me. But it's like we have the recipe for things, right? Mm-hmm. And the food that we want to use and the things we want to use, that is our conscious mind doing what we need to do. But I would say the subconscious mind is more of like the spices we put on there, right? That kind of flavors it up and stuff like that. That kind of add more nuance to the world that we don't really know where they're coming from.
I actually like that analogy a lot. In fact, that's actually how my brain processes things really well. So if anything,
I'm glad. I thought it was a little abstract there.
No, if anything, that's actually a great way to explain it to a kid too.
Yeah.
Because you're probably thinking like penne alla vodka, making it from computer.
favorite.
It's one of my favorites too, actually. There's a woman that works with my stepmom. She's a first-generation American to an Italian family. And so because her sons were really good with us growing up, we have kind of a tight bond. And so one day she invited me over to the house to make it from pure scratch. I can kind of see someone slicing up the prosciutto and then putting in the right amount of vodka. Not like the one woman who was like 2 shots of vodka and there was just like 2
It's like the
clumps.
bottle.
The entire bottle,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's kind of like one of those shows. They have everything laid out, but then you're right, it is those like the coriander or like the garlic you add to it that really livens up the food, because besides that, you can only eat a thing of chicken without salt for so many times.
Yeah. And that's, I think, gets sprinkled into our decision making and things like that in a way that we don't always know. And sometimes it can be problematic, like particularly not problematic as far as like fault goes, but problematic in like it could lead to like difficult behaviors. It's like somebody has gone through like a traumatic event. Some of their subconscious will react to things in a way that they reacted when the traumatic event happened, right? Mm. So that, if you want to go with the spice analogy, is kind of like if like we just like unlocked the salt and just dumped it on it, right? And it's to no fault of their own. They didn't create this for themselves. It's very, very difficult. But that's kind of where the subconscious can kind of move us in a direction that's not particularly healthy, and we don't know that's where it's coming from until you kind of go to therapy and work that stuff out.
Okay, fair enough, actually. So I've said this on the show a few times, but unfortunately my mom passed away in a car accident. So
sorry to hear that, Danny.
I appreciate it.
No idea.
I appreciate it. Thank you, though. But so it's like I'm not afraid to drive, but driving long distances, that's scary for anybody. But it was on a long drive, to go visit friends in Virginia that the accident occurred, in the middle of the trip. So I don't know if it is the subconscious that's making me being like extra tense when I'm driving.
Of course.
But I mean, I can still drive and operate a vehicle, no problem. It's just that, like you said, a traumatic event happened. So therefore, my brain's going to be like, keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah, you have a different relationship with that whole process of driving now, right? There's an added layer of fear in there, obviously, like perfectly reasonable for what you experience. And that kind of sprinkles into every drive that you kind of make now.
Exactly. And plus, as you know, since 2015, since you've been here, the drivers down here aren't exactly the best either.
No, they're not. Now, mind you, they're not great in Jersey either. So it wasn't a crazy transition. It was just a different transition.
Okay, so how I see it, I feel like Jersey is a lot more crass, and therefore they'll be more likely to just
spot on.
Yeah, just be more of a danger to you, because if you get up in their grill and you do something stupid, they will do something back. Whereas these are just old people. It's not that they're necessarily dumb, but that of all these old people, they can barely operate themselves. Will make you think they can operate a motor vehicle. Well, let's put it this way. It all depends.
Right. Depends. Nice. It took me a second there, but I'm with you. That was very, very good. Yeah, I'd imagine that up north it's just a little more malicious intent when it comes to the driving issues. Or down here it's just problematic.
I joke around saying that because both my parents are from New York, I have inherent road rage genes.
I also have that deep in my soul. So interestingly, sometimes I'll do group therapy, and when I talk about what we were just talking about before, and reframing cognitive distortions, the example I always use is the thoughts we have in road rage, because that's one that I struggle with. Exactly that. of the unhealthy thoughts I get when somebody cuts me off, and how to reframe those to make sure it doesn't affect me in a negative way. That is the example.
You know what? That's fair because, not gonna lie, when I'm at a green light and someone doesn't go for 5 seconds, I want to honk my horn. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, if it isn't that they're on their phone, maybe they're just having a bad day and they're just like, I don't want to deal with stuff. Because there's this one meme that this happened to me before, but it's like, you've had such a long day at work and you don't play any music, so you just kind of just sit in the car.
Yeah,
and just,
with your thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's called attribution theory, right? So if you attribute their negative behaviors to something that isn't so negative, you actually feel better about it. You get on the highway and like somebody's driving like 110 just zipping by you. And our first thought is like, what's wrong with this guy? He's going to get somebody killed. If you reframe it to, okay, maybe his wife's in the hospital and she's about to give birth and he's got to get to the hospital.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yep. And you attribute it to something else. And the way that you think about it now is healthier for you. You don't have to be right.
Yeah.
Right? He could just be an asshole. You know what I mean?
That's
but it helps us to attribute it to something more positive, so now that you're in a better place. That's a perfect example.
Okay. Actually, that's exactly the example I was thinking in my brain, because I think it was on The Simpsons where it's just like Homer was like speeding, but that's just because I think Marge was about to give birth to one of the 3 kids. And
there you go. And that is like a perfect example of, it's not about being right or wrong with your thoughts, right? Because there's a very good chance you're not right. Like the odds of this person actually going to the hospital for that reason are probably pretty low. But it's not about right or wrong. It's about just considering that it could be another thing rather than this guy's just terrible. And that puts you in a much healthier mind space. Just keep going about your day.
You know, I like that because I don't know if we're coming out of COVID, but
right.
Everyone has been very uptight these past 2 years, and for good reason. But at the same time, I feel like we should all give ourselves a little bit of grace. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think that when we're quick to judgment and we're quick to kind of going after people for one action or one thing and just trying to, like, again, it's all or nothing, like, okay, they did this and now they're a terrible person. We need to give each other grace. We have to give ourselves grace too. Because I think the most judgmental person you'll probably meet in your life is yourself. Yeah. Right? We judge ourselves in a way that really is super unrealistic because we're the only ones on the face of the earth that know everything we've ever done and said, ever.
This is kind of stupid, but this kind of goes back to what you were saying. But sometimes I just randomly dance to myself because I have songs playing in my head and I can totally hear the music and I'm like on beat, but then I realize my sister's laughing and I go, oh, wait a minute, I totally forgot. No one can hear the music inside my head.
That's you being uniquely you. There's nothing more wonderful in this world than people being uniquely themselves. And that's a tremendous thing.
I mean...
Sure, there's confines to it.
Exactly. I mean,
some boundaries.
Exactly.
You make a very, very good point. That comes to the boundaries conversation, right? If a lot of times clients will ask for like an absolute answer on things, and I'm like, everything with nuance, right? Because there are some things that like, hey, we really should do this. But there's always some boundaries that you got to make sure you're staying within the confines of. So yes, being uniquely yourself as you is cool. If you're hurting somebody, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, it just sucks too because like some people, they actually want to like make their lives better, but just that they don't have enough experience to know what to do in order to make their lives better. So
we don't give ourselves that grace, right? It's one of the most powerful things I can do for my client in therapy when they're really, really hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. It's just the simple question is, if we reverse roles and I was your best friend, what would you tell me? If you're going through this, what would you tell your best friend about this, right? I bet you wouldn't come from this super judgmental, what's wrong with you place, right? Or maybe like your little niece or your little nephew, right? But we don't want to give ourselves that same grace. And that becomes very, very problematic because that's where like the self-hatred comes in, a lot of like the shame comes in and things like that, because we come from this place of, yeah, if everybody else does it, it's okay, but when I do it, it's problematic.
I felt that too, and not that I felt this because I was autistic, but because I was so different from all my peers, I did some things, and then they were like, "Why are you doing this, Danny?" And so then I kind of like held it back, and so I was like, "Uh-oh," I was put out on the firing line, and I just wanted to get out of there, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's sad, Danny, because I'm not even sure that, especially in middle school, like that, there's like intentional, malicious intent. It's just people. Again, it's easier for people a lot of times to see a certain label, to see a certain thing, and just judge a person or look at them strictly through that lens. And that's why it's so vastly important that we don't do that to ourselves.
Right. I mean, don't get me wrong, that doesn't discredit like bad people in history.
Agreed.
Because, for example, I don't think anybody, or at least anybody that's sane, would want to praise Hitler as a good guy.
Sure.
I mean, there are pictures of him, with his dog, and him and Eva Braun, and him petting the head of a good little Aryan girl during a rally, showing that he's such a fantastic guy. But then at the same time, you just can't discredit that. Of course, treat everyone with a grain of salt, but if someone has done something majorly like that, then you kind of have some leeway to be like, yeah, this person's horrible.
Yeah, in the most like extreme of examples. And also,
well, I'm a Jew, so that's the first guy that comes to me.
No, but meaning in like I think you're spot on with that, but also in the sense of like, obviously one of the most vile people to ever walked the face of the earth. I would imagine that showed up in every area of his life. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there was probably, like, even if you look at the picture of him petting a dog and things like that or whatever, I'd imagine in every minute of his life, those parts of him showed up. You know what I mean? So it's not even just like looking at him through that one lens. I'd imagine that vile kind of nature of that person showed up in every single thing.
Yeah, and do you know what kind of the worst part is? Some people do stuff like that, and from the outside we see it as evil, but for them, they think it's totally reasonable. And it goes back to what you said before about how what is right and what's wrong. But that's a kind of a point where, yeah, what you did was wrong.
Yeah, we got most people on the right side of that, I would like to think. And that's what's so important, exactly like you said. Well, I try not to get into right and wrong with my clients because with a different perspective, you can argue that anything's right, as wild as that is, right? So we have to go back to what's healthy for you, then. What is actually working for you and helping you be the person you want to be in this world.
Just like how Charles Manson thought he was doing everything good.
Yeah, sent from God, the whole thing, right? He was really going in.
Yeah, so
he was an interesting dude.
Yeah, I think, going back to like nuances, good or bad, depending on who the person is. I'm not getting political when I say this, but there are politicians that kind of not balance per se, but some people have some good things to say about them, and then there's their track record.
Very polarizing. Yes.
Exactly. And so this sounds like an extreme question, but do you see some of these politicians, especially with like their double-sided nuances, do you think they could ever like compare to like bad people of history, or like do you think they could ever be seen as good people in history, or do you think they're just going to be seen as they were a politician who did some bad things?
What an interesting way to ask that. That's awesome. So I have like my thoughts on all of that have always been like, it's not so much good or bad. Now I'd imagine that there might be some extremes where there is some maybe good and some bad and things like that. I've always kind of seen that world as just, especially as a therapist who sits with people all day, I just see that world as very inauthentic, right? So I don't know if I can really make a statement on if they would be seen as like good or bad in the history of the world, because I don't think we ever really get a real view of who these people are. Right.
Oh, that's a good point.
And that's the part I think I struggle with the most is I'm not sure I've ever had a moment. This could just be me, and it could be also my therapist brain. But when I watch a politician speak, I don't think I've ever had a moment where I'm like, I can really get behind this person. Because even if it's stuff that sounds good to me, I don't think I'm actually hearing the person. I don't think this is actually who this person is. There's so many different people writing things for them and telling them.
I was about to say,
market research.
Sounds like a teleprompter is going on in their head.
Yes, it's not a human. It's not a person that's talking. Right? I've worked too long with people, and I've spent too much time in rooms with people to talk about like the deepest parts of their soul and the human parts of them. To look on a screen, see a politician speak and be like, this is an authentic person.
Got it.
I think that's where I get really caught up. So to answer your question, I'd imagine that some of them could go down as some bad people in the history of the world. I just think I guess the action part of it, we can kind of make an assessment on. But as far as like what they say, I don't think we're getting them, to be very honest with you. I think we're getting the 5 writers they have behind the curtain.
Okay, that's a good answer, because the way that I was describing it, it sounds like something that would take, a lot of people just to process it, just to really think about. Because, for example, when you see these politicians at, like, charity things, like you said, it might not be them wanting to be there, but at the same time, they are there.
Yes. So there's some good in there, right? Like, even if their intentions aren't great, if they're doing good in the world, like, who am I to be like, yeah, well, this guy's an asshole. Yeah, he's at this charity event, but he's only there for publicity. But, like, if he's still giving a lot of money to wonderful charities, who am I to judge this person,
exactly.
Right? So that's where it kind of gets caught up of, like, you could still do good even if the intentions aren't great in those moments.
Yeah, and the way you're describing how, like, people think and how you talk to them about it, I think that's a beautiful thing because, like I said, this world, especially since COVID, has been very uptight, and we're not giving each other any kind of grace. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, for example, if someone's being lazy, just...
People, again, want to just kind of, this person's not working during COVID, so it's the early label of, like, they just don't want to work. When, yeah, there are some people like that, and, they got to deal with their own stuff, but there are also a lot of people that's not really their intention. They're really just in a legitimately difficult spot here.
Okay, actually, that's where I was kind of
going
with.
You.
Okay, awesome, because I just couldn't get it out, but it's just that one of my traits is, unfortunately, that I'm lazy. It's just, I do put in work in order to get where I want to in life. It's just that it takes a little bit more of a kick in the butt in order to do so.
You and I both, man. I need the fire under my ass.
Exactly. But then the thing is that, people see laziness as a horrible trait. So much so to the point where they will, like, not want to be associated with you.
Again, lazy's tough, too, because I think also people just have a unique way of going about things, and they can figure things out without, like, grinding themselves into the ground.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, it's like... it's irresponsible, in my opinion, to see somebody, again, just through that lens and be like, lazy person, bad person, right? And then we just go. People just, listen, some of the most successful people in the world are successful because they can find unique ways to go about things without hard work, wake up at 4 a.m,
Smarter,
grind it out.
not harder.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that, right? But again, people want to do this overgeneralizing, like, because nobody hears the word lazy and like thinks it's a good thing, right? So it's so easy to just throw that label on somebody and be like, that's who this guy is.
Oh, all or nothing thinking.
Yes, precisely it, my friend.
See, we're bringing it all back.
We're moving around, baby.
Yeah. Since the cameras are about to cut off, I don't think I ever asked you. This is kind of where I was wanting to go back to about how it's beautiful that you wanted to do this, but it's just, what made you want to do this? You're so great. I felt like I was getting a mini therapy session there. So how much?
Sometimes I can't turn it off, Daddy.
I was going to say, how much do I owe you? Do
No,
I still have time?
I should be paying you. This has been awesome, truly. So why I got into it. So I have a boring answer to this. I think people want to hear something more profound when they ask me this question. But the truth of it is, go to undergrad, not really sure what I want to do. I always liked the mind. I liked psychology. I never even took psychology classes in high school. I always liked that part of just learning. So psychology was the way to go. I'm in undergrad. I'm doing psychology. I don't really know what I want to do with it. I learned pretty quickly about myself that I was never going to be able to be like a 9 to 5, stick me in office guy. You'd probably lose me in about 3 days. So I'm thinking I have to be around people. I need to interact with people, right? So how can I do psychology and people? And then the obvious combination is I should probably just be a therapist. Yeah, sit with people and use psychology to help their lives, right? So obviously there's a major need there. I liked the idea of being able to, and mind you, when the idea of who you think you're going to be as a therapist when you're in school is vastly different than when you actually, right? I think I'm going to like learn some theory and just save everybody's lives. You know, it's not really the case. So what I thought it was going to turn into is not exactly what it is, but that motivation of knowing that if I got to where I wanted to get to, I could make a real impact while still doing something that I give a shit about. It was like a gift that I never, thought that I could be given in life, when you're like in high school trying to think about your job and stuff like that. So that was kind of the obvious path when it all kind of came together that way. And I know it's not like the most interesting story about it ever, but it's the real one.
It's a beautiful story because it's your story.
Yeah.
Just like how you said before, how everyone is vastly unique. You don't need to save the world, but you're saving a few people. And for them, it's saving the world.
And you know what the key to that is? And I have to tell my clients this all the time because I have such beautiful people in my life and wonderful clients in my life that try to give me more credit than I deserve. The truth of it really is I don't save anybody. I help them save themselves. At the end of the day, if they don't want to get better or they don't implement some of the stuff, I tell them this all the time, and I think other therapists might get a little mad at me, but my job in that room is actually a lot easier than the client's job. I show up, I listen, I get to care and love the person across from me, and then I get to just leave and just keep being my goofy self. They have to take in this information, make legitimate changes in their lives and implement these things and talk about the hardest, most difficult things in the world and then go about their lives. Yeah. Their job's actually a lot harder than mine. Yeah. They're the brave ones within the room.
Because they made that decision. Because they knew that something wasn't right and decided to make a change.
Yes. And it's one thing to have some awareness. It's a whole other thing to have the courage to show up, talk to a stranger about it, and obviously become not a stranger after time, right? But it starts as a stranger. To be that vulnerable and open and then make a conscious decision to get better. It's one of the most courageous things you can do in this world. So when clients really do get better and they get healthier and they go from a really dark place to a healthy place and they want to give me credit for it, it's so vastly important that I remind them that I didn't do any of that, right? It's kind of like they're driving. I just sit in the passenger seat. I'm like, hey, maybe go down that street. This might be a better route for you. Maybe give that a shot. But they're the ones that got to go through it.
I love that. Ryan, you're an amazing guy. And
thank you.
We're rounding out the talking portion of the show, but we're going to find out more about you in the last portion, which is the bonus question round. So,
bonus questions. I love game shows, Danny. This is like I'm fired up.
Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit of a break, and we'll get right into it.
All right, cool.
Excellent.
Very nice.
So, Ryan, I'm so glad that you came on the show so I could get to know you better as an individual. You sound like someone that I would love to give my time to in order for me to improve my mental health.
Thank you.
And so we're going to find out more about you now during one of my favorite parts of any Big DK Energy episode, and that is the bonus question round. 10 questions that you do not know about, but that are appropriate enough that you will still have clients at your practice.
Okay. I'd imagine that's a fine line. I'm ready, baby.
All right. So since you're ready, question number 1. If you could have dinner with 3 of your life's influences, who would they be, and what's something you would want to learn from each of them?
Okay, so interestingly, even after everything I said about this person earlier, Sigmund Freud for sure, because without him, I'm not sure our profession gets to where it is. Everything that the way he went about everything maybe have not been the most spectacular thing ever, but without his courage to kind of go that route, I'm probably not here doing what I do, right? So as far as like sitting down and talking to him, I think it would really be more of just about motivation of like, because he was a medical doctor, right? So how did we go from there to, what modern therapy has kind of become now? So I think that would be awesome. So I'm a big Yankees fan, so I'm really just thinking about which Yankee I would want to talk about. Hey, Babe Ruth.
Okay,
It'd have to be Babe Ruth.
Gotta go with the OG.
Yeah, I gotta go with the salt and the swat. Because again, he's another guy like we talked about before. It's like you only can show up as you are, right? And like you bring you everywhere you go. Babe Ruth might be one of the most unique athletes ever. Where
how so?
He was one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and I think just from all stories and like even just the way he this is the most regular dude ever. He just ate hot dogs and just went about life, right? And he was able to just show up and be one of the best ever.
That's amazing.
Yes, it's something I would always aspire to be. So I feel like for him, again, it's about like how were you one of the greatest baseball players of all time still, and maybe just the most average normal dude outside of it. Like there's something so interesting about that.
The dichotomy of man.
Yes, yeah, precisely. And like being able to juggle both. And I'm not even sure he'd be able to even exist the way he did now, right? With all the media and stuff like that. They'd be like, what's wrong with this dude? So yeah, Babe Ruth.
And that's without all like the sports medicine,
Yeah, he just showed up. He just showed up as he is. And a lot of them would have like 9 to 5 jobs after.
Probably smoked an entire pack of cigarettes before he went up to bat.
He was a big cigar guy.
Okay, that too.
Yeah.
And then one more.
Okay, so Sigmund Freud, Babe Ruth, which I realize is a weird combination of people.
I love it.
And then I would have to go like Roman. I think I would go like Julius Caesar.
Okay.
I think if I thought more about it, I'd have a better historical figure that I can think of. But right now, Caesar's coming to my brain.
He's a great one, especially the Battle of Alesia versus Vercingetorix.
It's wild. It's why it's like it seems so much ahead of its time as far as like strategy goes and the way they went about life in general that I think my question's for him. He would be the one I think I'd go full therapist mode and like talk about motivations and how like he shows up the way that he is and why he shows up the way that he is. I think he would be, out of the three, he'd be the one I'd want the most to be my client.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, not saying that I'm a therapist, but I'm doing research for a future episode about Roman military history.
Awesome.
So we're starting in the first section, but turns out the Gauls, the people that he mainly fought against.
Yeah.
So before Rome was Rome, it was considered a backwater city. And so
Sure.
they were sacked by the Gauls. And so many years later, after they became the powerhouse that they became under Julius Caesar said one of the main reasons why he did so much damage to the Gauls is because they sacked Rome back during that time. So maybe that's a good basis to start your questions on.
Yes, chip on a shoulder, right?
There we go, yeah.
I tell my clients a lot that actually a chip on your shoulder is not a terrible thing as long as what it motivates you to do is positive in your life.
There we
right
go.
Now, Caesar was conquering, so a little different, but
Yeah, exactly.
But in your life, having a little chip on your shoulder to motivate you can go a long way.
Absolutely, and some people will just not be stopped.
The truth, Caesar almost was one of them.
Yeah.
Minus Brutus.
Well, yeah. And you, Brutus. Number 2, dream vacation and itinerary.
Okay, so on the same theme, Italy, through and through. It has the historical background that I love. It has the cultural background. My mother's family's from Naples, Italy. My father's family is from Sicily. So I have family ties there also. So main reason is the food because I can live and die on Italian food for the rest of my life. So
If carbs weren't such a big factor into weight gain, then yeah.
Oh, and I unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I don't really take that into account. I eat them anyway. Pasta trumps all of that for me.
Yeah.
So Italy.
Sorry, I'm not going to stop eating Italian food.
No.
I'll find alternative ways to eat it, but I'm still eating it.
Yeah, it's going into my body regardless.
I'm glad we can be on agreement on one thing. Number 3, if you could snap your fingers and one type of mental illness would be completely gone and these people would be cured, what would it be?
Oh, Danny, that's completely disappeared. So when you first asked this question, my first thought was to go in this psychosis route because I worked at a treatment center for many years, and in that treatment center there was a mental health wing, right, which I worked in for a year. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of clients that were that struggled with schizophrenia and psychotic disorders and things like that. There's a certain level of, I guess, helplessness being on the other end as their therapist when you can't really get to the cognitive places that you want to get to. So my first thought was to choose that, right? But now as I sit here and think about it, I think the one mental illness or the one struggle that's showing up so prominently in our lives now because we always have these cell phones in our pocket and we're always available and we're always on is anxiety. I think throughout time, the more and more connected we become and the more and more we just have to be on all the time and be present all the time, anxiety seems to be really running rampant through the world. So easily. I'm actually going to go with anxiety, interestingly, but I want the listeners to know that psychosis was on my mind first and foremost.
Okay, well, actually, I think everyone would love to have anxiety taken out. So either answer would have been great because it is your answer, but honestly, since I deal with a lot of anxiety, fantastic answer.
Yeah. And then
Good answer.
Thank you, Family Feud. Nice. Yeah.
Number 4. Name 3 superpowers you would like to have and why.
Okay. 1, mind reading, because I'd be the most elite therapist of all time.
For real?
Yep. Right off the bat. I'd be unstoppable in the world of mental health.
You'd probably find a lot of disturbing things, too.
Yes. And I've spoken to people about this before, and that is usually the warning that they had. Now, mind you, I think with any superpower comes...
Mind you.
Nice. Very nice. I think with any superpower comes some things you got to be worried about. So I think I'm just simply looking at that through the lens of my profession. I'm sure they would come with some problematic things. But mind reading would be awesome. 2, flight. The idea of just being able to go anywhere I want in the skies just sounds tremendous to me. And
especially for free nowadays?
Yes, it would go for free. And I feel like just waking up one day and be like, let's go to Italy today would be freaking awesome.
Hop on my back, Alexa.
Yeah, let's get out of here and let's go see the Colosseum from thousands of feet in the air.
Yeah, and then be back for dinner.
Yes. Or eat dinner there because it's Italian food.
You know what? I like that much better.
Be back for sleep.
Then one more.
I don't think I've ever gotten into a third one. I'm already a pretty sick superhero here. You know what? I'm going to do the strength. And I'll tell you why. Because now my ability to do home improvement has gone tenfold.
There we go.
Right? I don't even want it for power or strength or to hurt anybody. I want it so that I could just lift things around the house and just make my life exponentially easier.
Honey, we need to hire movers. Nope, we got me, baby.
I'm ready to go, baby. Where it's on the shoulders. So yeah, I'm going to go with that for just strictly domestic purposes.
Now that I think about it, if you had flight, then you could become even a more elite therapist because you can, go to people outside of South Florida.
That's a good point. That is a good point. I'd be a therapist everywhere.
Number 5, if you can conduct any experiment in order to research any mental illness, what would it be and how would you do it?
So there is diagnoses, right, for addiction, but it'll be like specific to substance use and things like that. But I think I would do it through that lens because there is still so much to kind of be figured out about how addiction kind of hacks the reward system in our brain and, kind of leads people to act as if they need it to survive because their brain legitimately kind of molds in that way the more and more that addiction takes place. So I think the research behind those things, I think it would be very, very interesting and very important. How I would go about it, probably go talk to people that know a lot more about it than I do and let them get on board. But I would go about it in a way that's less about information and more about people. I think what happens with this research and things like that is that we forget we're talking about people. Mm-hmm. These aren't just numbers on a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And we forget the human element of this. So if I was going to go about it, I would make sure it was more of a
humanizing way, not so much in a way that it's like you're an addict.
Stuff. Yes.
You're an addict.
Precisely.
We're here to solve you, but that's because you're a problem in our
Precisely.
society.
When in reality, it's just something they experience, like any one of us, right? It's just that ended up being their solution to some problems, and it ended up just being an unhealthy one. But we all choose solutions to things, and sometimes they're unhealthy. So it's not that they are vastly different, it's that the solutions are problematic, right? And looking at it through that lens of just a human who has an issue with how they solve problems instead of being like, you're an addict, what's wrong with you, is I think what that field needs.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it because, like you said before, some people are just going through a really tough time and maybe they just went about trying to, cope with it in a different way. So, excellent answer for that. Number 6, you've been given the assignment to come up with 6 headliners for a festival.
Living or Dead?
Living or Dead, yeah.
Okay, so my favorite band of all time is Linkin Park.
Okay. Bring back Chester.
Yeah, Chester, speaking of mental health. So Linkin Park, 1. I love Linkin Park. I saw them live once. It was awesome. Yeah, I'm going to go eclectic here, too. I'm not staying in one genre. We're going to follow Linkin Park with my boy, Billy Joel.
Let's go.
I love Billy Joel so much.
Well, you're from that area, too. So.
Yes, and I saw him in Madison Square Garden one time, Danny. He was the freaking most
so
awesome
am I.
thing.
He's amazing.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It was so good. Now we're going to go into, we're going to go AC/DC. I love John Mellencamp, also known as John Cougar Mellencamp. I got a lot of my musical taste from my father. My father's a big John Mellencamp fan, so I'm going to sneak Mellencamp in there.
Cherry Bomb is a good song.
Cherry Bomb's a great song. We're going to go Jay-Z in the 5 spot.
Okay.
We're going to we're moving through all this. 6 is going to be Biggie. If it was going to be Biggie or Tupac, we're going to go Biggie, though. So we're going to hit I'm going to hit as many genres as I can under the sun.
You know what? I love it.
Yes, I'm a punk rocker in my heart and soul, but then I got other stuff going on. So Linkin Park's going to fill that void in that headliner, and then we'll roll after that.
You know what? I love it. Or they can be the last act because they kind of fuse everything together. You know, the rock, rap, and the hip-hop.
Jay-Z and Linkin Park did the album together, Collision Course.
That's right.
Freaking awesome.
Can I get an encore?
Oh, it's the best, dude. It's the best.
Number 7. If you could do an NFL Sunday in a dream location, where would it be? Describe the room that you would watch it in.
Okay, so I would do it in Nashville. I am a Tennessee Titans fan. Being a Tennessee Titans fan is a pit of misery, but I am a fan through and through. So I would do it in Nashville. And I'd probably go like dude cave. You know what I mean? Like basement, TVs, bar that I built. You know what I mean? Like things on the walls.
With your super strength?
With my there you go, super strength, right? So I can build that very quickly. Yeah, I'd probably go like man cave, dude cave type of thing. Just being.
Man, that sounds fantastic.
That's the best.
I can go for that right now. Number 8. If you could live in any book, or if you can't think of any book, movie universe, what would it be? And what's your role?
My first thought is to say Westeros, which would be the freaking most awesome thing ever. But also, if you live in Westeros, like you could just be murdered at any moment.
Well, that,
you know what I mean?
That and also just like, well, I guess you would just dig a hole and then just take a dump in there. But I'm thinking,
right? But it's the norm at that point. Everybody's just kind of digging holes and taking dumps.
True. Oh, now that I think about it, I mean that's how Tywin died.
Yeah.
A great
oh yeah. Crossbow right in the toilet. Spoilers.
Yeah. Spoilers. Not back.
So I'm gonna stick with Westeros. But I'm gonna choose to not be out for the throne or be in the game at all and just live in Westeros. I'm just gonna be a dude. I'm gonna be like one of like the spider's spies.
Okay.
Just float around living. I guess they were all kids, but something like that.
So since you said that, bonus question.
Okay.
What house would you want to be a part of?
Oh, okay. So now first instinct immediately is Stark because I just love the Starks.
Yep.
But they're up north and it's freaking winter all the time. That seems miserable to me.
Yeah, that's like New Jersey for you, right?
Yes, but worse. I get the people would be better, but in Stark World, in Winterfell, but the weather would be tough. So I think probably Dorne. That's the one that's like really nice, right?
Yeah, and
Prince Oberyn, legend.
And also the fact that they were never fully conquered by the Targaryens.
Yes. So I think Dorne is the way to go. I think that's the most like modern. I feel like their civilians are kind of chilling.
Number 9. What's a client that changed your life for the better? No names, of course.
Right. So obviously names and who this individual is out of it. So it's interesting because so many different clients have changed my life in different ways. There's one client that I had in treatment, and I had this individual twice because he had relapsed and come back. But obviously just like without who he is or anything like that. But he was the type of client where, treatment's hard. Treatment's really hard. And the people that show up there and are courageous enough to do that and to want to get better and to fight this thing are the most like badass people in the world, right? But he had such an innate ability, and still does. Obviously I'm not in contact with him anymore, but from what I remembered of him, going through treatment as if he chose all of it. So what I mean by that is like obviously nobody would choose addiction, but he had this mindset that he was going to go into this thing like through a lens of like positivity and enjoyment. So every single day I walk in there, it's 8:30. It's still my job, and I love these people to death, but it's my job, and it's 8:30 in the morning. And he would come knocking on the door and tell me to have a good day, and that like today was going to be a good day, and he was ready to go to work. And like positivity and that mentality in general is so powerful. But for him to be a client working through an addiction, and especially the second time around, like coming off a relapse, and to come through it with that kind of positivity, and to like share it with me. Like I think sometimes as a therapist, like obviously my client knows there's a human across from them, right? But they're very,
hesitant.
Right. Yes. Hesitant to like see me as like that human person. And they, they're more kind of obviously focused on what they're doing, of course, right? Mm-hmm. But he was very innate about like asking me about how I was. Sometimes he would come and just like check in on me and stuff like that. And it was just,
that's adorable.
Yeah, it was awesome. And especially with what he was going through. And he made a lot of progress in therapy too, right? So I was able to like hang my hat on that as well. So he was one of those clients where like I'd like to think I impacted his life, but I know for sure he impacted mine in a very, very positive way. So I think about him a lot. He wrote me a letter that I've kept, and I look at that a lot. And he was awesome.
That's beautiful, actually. And I'm glad that guy had enough of strength to push on through something like that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's already hard the first time around. Second time around though.
Yeah. Going back and seeing the same people and having to admit he made a mistake and stuff like that. He did it with love and grace, and he was awesome.
More power to that guy.
Yeah.
And we're having such a good time that we're already at the last question.
Okay.
So
I'm ready.
It's a question that I ask everybody, but the answers always vary. And that is, what is your best, most recent accomplishment?
About 9 months ago, I started my own private practice.
Hey, let's go.
Well, yeah, we're out here, baby. So that I believe has been my best, most recent accomplishment. And it's not even that working for other people was awful or anything like that. It's just to be able to go about therapy now my way and like impact people the way that I want to impact them and show up for them the way I want to show up for them has been like one of the greatest gifts that I've ever gotten in life. And it's just kind of just nice to work for yourself,
But it's a gift that you're also giving to society. So
I hope so, Danny. I hope so. If I'm doing anything in this world, thank you.
I know so.
Thank you. If I'm impacting anybody, through this. It's been worth it, and it's been enough. But like we talked about earlier, is that like the imposter syndrome stuff shows up and things like that. So it's important to be reminded. But yes, so RM counseling, it's my private practice. It's been quite a ride. It's been tremendous. I still get to do the work that I love to do. I still get to work with some beautiful people, but now kind of my own terms. So
I like it.
It has been truly wonderful. I am truly grateful for it. So yes,
awesome.
That accomplishment, I would say.
That's an amazing accomplishment, man. Good for you. Or in the words of the Jewish people, mazel tov.
Thank you.
Well, Ryan, today was a lot of fun and also very insightful, especially to like the way that the mind works. And I'm glad that we got to talk about men's mental health because, that is a subject that's constantly being brought up, especially in most recent society. So I just want to say thank you so much for gracing us with your knowledge and presence.
Thank you, Danny. And like the last thing, because I meant to say this before with the men's mental health thing, is, well, it's the only thing we struggle with in this world where like we label ourselves with it, where if I ask somebody, they say, I am depressed or I am anxious, but nobody ever says, like, I am a broken leg or I am a cold or I am a fever, right?
That's a good point.
You experience, right? So if we start looking at mental health that way, the way that we look at every other illness in the world, right, especially with men's mental health, we'll no longer have that shame attached to it, right? If you just say, I'm experiencing anxiety, experiencing depression, now it's something we can all kind of get around together, right? So especially with men's mental health, if we could start to do that separation a little bit and realize it's something you experience rather than something you are, I think that's going to open a lot more doors to people come out here and talk about this stuff because it's vastly important.
That's beautiful. Well, Ryan, for helping out the people of South Florida and just anyone that you come in contact with your knowledge and, just you being such a down-to-earth person that they can feel grounded and feel safe with. It's for all those reasons and more that I think you, Ryan Meir, have big DK energy.
It's been an honor, man. It's really been an honor. So thank you for being you because this has been awesome.
Well, thank you so much. And so, folks, we're going to put all of his social media links in the description below and the website to his practice and all that other fun stuff. And so before we head out, is there anything you want to promote or say, Ryan?
That's about it. I think through the accomplishment thing, the practice would be the one plug, I guess. So yeah, if you're in the South Florida area or even in Florida in general, because there's virtual sessions now too, and you or somebody else need some help and you want to give me a call, we'll put the links in the bio, and email is rmcounseling.contact@gmail.com. So mental health is one of the most important things in this world today that we need to be looking at. So if you or anybody in your life needs some help, give me a call, give me an email, and we'll get to work.
Excellent. Well, with that all being said and done, I'm Danny K, the Big DK Energy Podcast, and we are signing off.
All right.